All right. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing this morning? Good. So just encourage anyone in the back to come find a seat. We're going to go ahead and get started here very shortly. So if you are interested in starting your first garden, or if you just want tips on planting a garden, then you are in the right place here. My name, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Dysinger. And just a very quick little background, my family, extended family, have a farm in Tennessee. And after high school, I came home and worked on the farm for many years doing commercial agriculture, selling to the community. We did like subscription boxes of produce, as well as selling at farmers markets. We sold to restaurants, and we tried a bunch of different things. Then after working with the family business for many years, I branched off and started teaching people gardening, specifically focused on home gardening and people that were homesteading, wanted to grow their own food, but not necessarily interested in market gardening. And then multiple of my students went on and started market gardening anyways. So what we do, and my business is called Born to Grow, and then just recently we have started a garden planning software called Seedtime, and we'll tell you about that in a little bit. But our main focus is still on home gardeners and getting you set up for success in a very simple and easy way. So to begin with, let's just bow our heads for a quick word of prayer, and then we'll jump in. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come together and to share, to think about our gardens and think about planting and growing food. It is the first place that you put man in the world, and what an amazing thing that we continue it so many years later. And we just pray that you would guide and that you would speak to us this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Okay, so in getting started, the topic of this morning is help. How do I start my first garden? And I'm just curious, how many of you, is it really your first garden? All right. Yeah, okay, so most of you, good. And for those of you who it isn't, we're going to be covering principles of planting a garden. So really this can go for anyone. It doesn't have to be your first garden. But one of my goals in teaching home gardeners is to try and make things as simple as possible, okay? So we're going to be going over some basics. And one of the first things that we want to do is to talk about what I call our game plan. So this is kind of something that I came up with as I was teaching people how to plan their gardens and just think about their gardens. And so the first thing that I want to do is just give you a little bit of a framework of, there's kind of different stages of a garden plan, and you can kind of see them. They're a little hard to read here, but on the next slide we'll see it. I divided the growing experience of your garden into 4 stages. Let's go to the next slide. So the first one is ignition, and you can kind of think of this a little bit like a rocket that is getting up off of the ground, right? So the first thing is you're getting everything ready, you're getting the rocket on the launch pad, you're fueling it, you're getting it all ready to go. And that is the ignition stage. The next stage is launch. This is when your rocket is just getting started launching off of the launch pad, right? And we'll go into a little bit more detail soon. The next is grow. This is as your rocket is flying up into the sky. And then the last one is extend. And that is where you send your rocket of a garden orbiting around the earth, right? So basically the idea here is, how many of you like the idea, the concept of being able to go out into your garden every single week of the year and have a fresh harvest that you could be pulling out of your garden, right? That sounds really exciting. What happens with a lot of people, though, is gardening kind of becomes a one-time experience scenario each year where, you get excited, you seed something in the spring, you have a glut of a harvest, if you have a harvest in the summer, right? And then well, that was my garden for the year, and now I have to wait all winter until the next one. So there are very simple ways that you can extend that season, and we'll talk about that a little bit more because it ties into your planning. So we're going to, just at this high level, look very briefly at what falls into each of these categories, okay? So the first one, ignition. And here you're going to be planning your garden, and there's several of these here, so we'll just go ahead and just click through. Yeah. You're going to be choosing what to grow, choosing where to grow it. If you do a soil test, this would be the time that you would do that. In the next class, we're going to talk to you about simple ways that you can build the health of your soil, even if you don't do a soil test. So we're going to be talking about some of that. The next one is ordering any soil amendments, any nutrients that you want for your garden. And so this is basically, we call this ignition because this is where you're getting everything ready, right? You're creating your plan, you're getting things ready, you're choosing what and where you're going to grow it, getting your soil amendments, and you'll also be ordering your seeds during this stage. By the way, at the end of this class, I'll give you a link where you can download these slides. So you're welcome to take pictures of the slides. I don't care, okay? So you're welcome to take pictures, but you can download them later. So if that helps you with your note-taking and all that. All right. Number 2 is launch. This is when you're going to be preparing your beds, right? Getting them ready to plant into. You're going to be amending your soil. This is when you're actually starting those seeds, starting those starts. And yeah, starting your plants, transplanting your plants out into the garden, and composting. Composting is something that you basically incorporate into your whole gardening process. But we just throw this here into launch because you want to get a good compost pile started early on in your experience. That's just a helpful, encouraging tip. Number 3, grow. This is the stage of your garden where you're watering it, you are weeding it, trellising any plants that need to be trellised. This is probably where you're going to be dealing with most of your pest control if you have pest problems, disease control, and the fun part, right? Harvesting, right? So harvesting and storing your veggies. This is as your plants are growing. And then number 4 is extend. So this is where you take that, the knowledge that you've learned. By the way, those first 3 stages, we really encourage you to learn those stages. And then as you get experienced with your garden, I mean, you can go into extending your season right away if you want to, but this is kind of like the next level up. You're going to extend timing for winter growing, gardening, protecting your veggies. How do you protect them? Growing them in the winter, etc. And that picture right there is a harvest that we had on Bountiful Blessings Farm. I'm pretty sure that was harvested in January. You can kind of see the snow there. So you can, there's actually very simple ways, and unfortunately we don't have time to get into all of them in this class for extending your season, but I will give you resources, free resources, where you can learn that information as well. All right, so just quick recap. Again, this is just to give you a framework. Does that make sense? And part of the idea of this is, you know, sometimes if we just compartmentalize some of these things in our mind, it helps us to keep things in order with our garden. So there's kind of 4 stages: ignition, launch, grow, extend. In this session, we're going to primarily be talking about this kind of beginning one, right? How do I plan my first garden? How do I get started? So let's jump right in and begin with following the game plan is key to success. In other words, if you have, how many of you, well, I guess if it's your first time gardening, then maybe you haven't, but there's many people, when they jump into their garden, they just kind of feel like they're flying by the seat of their pants. They don't know exactly when to do something. You know, should I be planting my tomatoes right now? How do I know? And then how do I do? Maybe I know what I need to do, but how do I do it, right? So following the game plan is a key to having a successful garden without facing those challenges and those hurdles. All right, so let's jump in. Here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. Part 1 is what to grow. We're going to discuss how do you choose what to grow in your garden. That's a very basic part of planning your garden. Number two, part two, is where to grow it. How are you going to map this all out? And it may be extremely simple for where you are, or it can get pretty complex if you have a very large garden, right? And then part number three is when to grow it, creating your planting calendar and what we call our perpetual harvest hack. This is a very simple way that you can actually set up a garden plan to have that continual harvest that we were talking about. So that's pretty exciting. We'll touch on that at the end. So let's jump right in with part number one. And by the way, I am going to try and, let me just look at, got to keep track of the time here. I am going to try and leave some time at the end for questions, okay? So they asked us presenters to specifically ask you to hold questions until the end. I don't know if maybe they announced that as well. So I'm going to try and save some time. So we're going to move pretty quickly through here. Once again, the slides are available for download, so you can keep them. Is that good with everyone? Okay, excellent. Part one, choosing what to grow. This may seem like a very basic step, but it's a very important one. So the very first thing is you want to make a list. And basically, you sit down and you make a list of what you would like to grow. And in the resources that I'm going to share with you at the end, we have what we call our garden planning worksheet. And it's a worksheet that just has a space where you can write down what you want to grow for your garden. It's got a whole column where you write that all down. It's got a column where you can mark in what seed company you're going to purchase it from. And there's multiple different columns in there, but it's just an easy way that you can get this done. A couple tips with this is, number one, we encourage you to be as specific as possible. What does that mean? That means that, for example, if you're growing cucumbers, go ahead and write down if you want to grow pickling cucumbers versus slicing cucumbers, right? There's different types of cucumbers that you can grow. Tomatoes is another great example. Do you want to grow cherry tomatoes, or do you want the big beefsteak slicing tomatoes? Because if you know what you want ahead of time, it's going to make it a lot easier when you go to the seed catalog and there's like 1,000 varieties of tomatoes to help narrow it down for you, okay? So just helpful little tips as we go along here. Number three is you go to the next step, and that is choosing the specific varieties of what you want to grow. So I'm going to give you, how many of you would like a few tips on how to choose a variety without getting overwhelmed by the thousands of varieties that are in seed catalogs, right? Okay, so let's jump in and talk very, very quickly about different varieties. There are, the first thing to note here is that there are different types of seeds. How many of you have heard of GMO seeds? That's probably a lot of you have heard, because it's a little bit more hype around that. How many of you have heard of hybrid seeds? Or open pollinated seeds, all right? Heirloom seeds. Yeah, a little bit more with the heirloom seeds, yeah. Okay, how many of you know the difference between all of them? Some? Yeah, kind of, a little bit here and there. Okay, so let's just go over them really quickly. We'll brush you up on it if you already know it, and if you don't, this will be a quick dive into the different types of seeds. Because when you go to a seed catalog, there's going to be heirloom seeds. There's going to be open pollinated seeds. And you want to know how to make it easy for you to decide is you'll want to know ahead of time, do I want open pollinated seeds? Do I want heirloom seeds? Do I want hybrid seeds, right? Okay, so all about seeds. Good seeds and good soil really are the two pillars of a successful garden, right? If you don't have good seeds, you're not going to have the plants. If you don't have good soil, the plants aren't going to grow well. Elliot Coleman, in his book, The New Organic Grower, says, without high-quality seeds, all other activities are moot. Like, there's no point in your garden without having good quality seeds. So what about GMO hybrid, open pollinated, and heirloom seeds? Let's look at some seed definitions very briefly, starting out with GMO seeds. These are genetically modified seeds. I'll give you basically, it's, to make this extremely simple, it's crossing two entirely different species in nature. So think, okay, this is an extreme example, but they have genetically modified goats' udders with spider silk, so that when you milk the goat, silk will come out from this, okay? So that's just extremely bizarre, but it's it gives you an idea of what it means by blending two species that would never happen naturally in nature. Does that make sense? When it comes to the garden, usually the examples aren't quite as bizarre, but for example, corn that is genetically modified is modified with a bacteria that kills worms, okay? So all of a sudden, this genes of this bacteria is inside, and what it does is it destroys the gut of the worm when they eat it. So those genes are now inside the corn, which, by the way, you then eat. So, you have to decide, do you really want to be eating the same genes that kills the guts of the worms, right? What's that going to do to your own gut? Well, that's a whole nother conversation. The good news is that most seed companies, you cannot buy genetically modified seeds just over the counter. The reason is that the companies that own genetically modified seeds have patents on those seeds, and so they actually have to have a contract with the farmer for the farmer to be able to grow their seeds. Now, there is issues with genetically modified seeds cross-pollinating with other seeds. So we do still highly encourage you to go with reputable seed companies, and I'll give you several seed companies that are reputable. At least we would consider them reputable seed companies. All right, hybrid seeds. Some people get hybrids and GMOs confused. Hybrid seeds are the cross between two or more varieties, usually of the same species. So a very simple way to think about it is a poodle crossed with a golden retriever. What do you get? A golden doodle, right? And if you breed that enough times, the golden doodle will now be a new breed that will breed true to type. But the first time you breed a golden doodle, what happens if you breed the two golden doodles together? At the first generation. This is getting into genetics now. So at the first generation, what happens is if you have two golden doodles that are first generation, their parents were a golden retriever and a poodle, they will have children, but their children will be the complete spectrum. There will be some that look more like golden retrievers, there'll be some that look more like poodles, and then there'll be some that look like golden doodles, okay? So the exact same thing happens in your garden. Why do people hybridize seeds? By the way, there's nothing that inherently wrong with hybrid seeds. It is something that happens naturally in nature because it is the same species crossing. I mean, that's how we get our dog breeds, right? The issue is that if you want to save the seeds from your plants, if you're using a hybrid, the seeds will still be viable, but they won't necessarily come out exactly the same as the hybrid that you planted. They'll most likely go back towards one of the parent varieties. So if you want to save seeds, you want to keep that in mind. Some advantages of hybrids is people will breed for disease resistance. If you live in an area that has a lot of mold problems or fungal problems or something like that, they'll find one variety that's very resistant and they'll hybridize it with another one that maybe has a fatter, juicier tomato, right? And then you'll get disease resistance with a bigger tomato. So that's kind of the reasoning behind it. All right, next one is open pollinated. This is a non-hybrid variety, and it's one that can reproduce itself true to kind. And the last one is heirloom. And these are basically the same, actually, heirloom and open pollinated. So in your mind, you can just basically look at them as the same. Heirloom just means that it's been around for hundreds of years. Long, long time. It's an open pollinated that has been around for a long time. So, coming back to your garden plan, how do you choose what varieties you want to grow? Actually, first of all, just a quick recap here. GMO seeds have serious health and environmental concerns. We don't have time to go into that. So you just want to stay away from them, basically. Hybrid seeds are not evil. We're all hybrids, in a sense, actually. And then hybrid seeds can have added vigor, uniformity, and disease resistance. The main thing is that hybrid seeds will not reproduce true to type. So when you're growing your garden, ask yourself, do I want to save the seeds from my garden, or is that not my biggest priority right now? And maybe your bigger priority is the disease resistance, right? And vigor of the plant, because maybe you have some disease issues. So there's nothing wrong, but this can help you narrow it down when you're looking through those seed catalogs, which ones that you want to go with. All right. Next one. There is some evidence that nutritional content may be superior in open pollinated varieties. I would encourage you to look and research into that if you're interested in that. And if you want to save your own seed, what I said earlier, you'll want to pick open pollinated seeds or heirloom seeds. If you do want to save your seeds, saving seed is unique to different plants. So I would highly encourage you to get a good book to guide you, okay? You can Google it. You can Google, how do I save seeds from tomatoes, right? Or something like that. And that can work as well. But there is a book, and you'll want to write this down because I don't think I have it in the slide here. But there's a book called Seed to Seed. Seed to Seed. And that's a great book for resources on saving seeds. All right. Let's go to the next one. So seed companies. These are some of our favorite seed companies that we purchase from over and over again, and we feel like they have good quality seeds. Johnny Selected Seeds, I'm going to give you where they're located as well. So if you want to buy from a company that's maybe more local to your area. So we have Johnny Selected Seeds, that's in Maine. High Mowing Seeds in Vermont. High Mowing Seeds are 100% organic. Their entire catalog is organic, so that's just a kind of perk from them. Baker's Creek Heirloom Seeds is in Missouri. They have 100% heirloom seeds, so that's kind of a perk for them, right? They're kind of specializing. Southern Exposure Seeds is in Virginia, and Territorial Seeds is in Oregon, and yes, one more. Peaceful Valley is here in California, and I believe that Peaceful Valley is 100% organic too. I know that they're called Peaceful Valley Organic something. Anyways, they're right here in California. All right. So if you're looking for, I would highly encourage you just to use that list to keep it simple for you. And let's see, if you do look for other seed companies, just look for something called the Safe Seed Pledge. And they basically pledge that they're not going to use any genetically modified seeds. And I believe that they do their best to keep cross-pollination with genetically modified seeds as well. All right. So, choosing seed varieties. Here's some tips in that context of the seeds. So, number one, do you want to save seeds? That's going to narrow it down for you to the open pollinated or heirloom seeds. Then I would encourage you to pick a seed company or two. I gave you 6 there. So I would just encourage you to pick 2 of the ones that are closest to you, right? And if you try and start looking through all 6, it can get pretty overwhelming because there's a lot of seeds out there and a lot of different varieties. You can order a catalog or look online. I believe all of those have online stores. So you can just look online if you want to, or if you like the physical catalog, you can do that. I'm pretty sure that they'll send it to you for free. Another thing is that I would encourage you, if you have the time, to go talk to your local farmers. If you go to a farmer's market and ask them, hey, what varieties worked best for you? There's no better resource than the growers that are actually growing in your area. They're going to have the most experience, and so, hey, it can be fun to get to know them too, right? And so ask them, hey, what varieties are your favorites? What has done really well in this area for you? And then just grow the same ones that they did. You know, you don't have to make it extremely complicated. All right. Next, some of these catalogs online have reviews, and so that's a great place to look and see what are other people really liking to grow right now. And then you can use some of our favorites, and I'm going to give you a resource where we list a bunch of our favorites for a whole bunch of different crops. So you can just go and, if you really want to, you could just pick some of our favorite varieties and you could use them as well. All right. Part 2, we got to move on here. After choosing what you're going to grow and the varieties, part 2 is choosing where you're going to grow it. And this is actually mapping out your garden space. And this can be fun. We're going to try and make it as simple as possible for you. So, your garden space. Number 1 is look for the areas around your house that get the most sunlight. Most vegetables that you're going to grow in your garden, herbs, whatever it may be, do well with as much sun as possible, basically. I'll give you some that can do okay in the shade as well. But for us in the northern hemisphere, that's generally going to be on the south side of your house, or if you have a slope, it would be on the south side of a slope, just because in the winter the sun falls down into the south side of the sky, and you get more sun, it shines on it more that way. So look for places that get the most sun. Most crops do best with 6 to 8 hours of full sun. South-facing slopes will stay warmer in the winter. And in hot zones like southern Florida, do we have anyone here from Florida? That's a long ways away. Yes, we do. Okay, fantastic. Like southern Florida, you may want to look for cool microclimates, actually. In fact, you may want to actually grow on the north side of your house, because some of the crops will actually do better in a cooler environment if you live in a place that gets really hot. And this would be the same actually for Southern California. Is there anyone from Southern California? Stays a lot warmer throughout the year, right? So you may actually want to, especially for cool weather crops, kind of do the opposite. Look for the cooler space. Maybe it gets a little bit more shade, and we'll talk about that next here. So there are some crops that do better in the shade. So this is not necessarily, like these crops do really good if there's full sun as well, but they can handle shade. Does that make sense? So they're more shade tolerant, maybe would be a better way to say it. These are primarily veggies that are grown for their leaves or their roots, and they're going to do better in the shade. Beets, some example of these is beets, carrots, garlic, potatoes, radishes, onions, Asian greens, broccoli, cabbage, collards, kale, lettuce. Most of the greens that you eat the leaves off of, those are going to be do better in the shade. By the way, an interesting note on these is most of these are cool weather crops. Like they like cooler weather, okay? So if you live in a place where it gets cold, you can grow these in the fall or in the early spring, and I would still say find the place with the most sun. If you live in a place where it's hot all year round, grow these in the coolest time of the year and maybe give them a little shade, because they're going to want it a little cooler. All right. So let's talk about mapping out your garden space. And we encourage you to map out your garden space with a pen and paper. It's fairly simple. You can do it on your computer if you're a little more high-tech or something like that, but just grab a pen and paper. You might want to do it on graph paper if you just want to make it to scale. It really depends on how detailed you want to get. And lay out your garden beds. So decide, look at your backyard and say, do I have 2 4x8 raised beds? Okay, just mark out a little 4x8 raised bed on your paper, or a couple of them. If you're growing in a small hoop house like this, decide how wide your beds are going to be, how wide your aisles are going to be, and go ahead and draw that out on your paper. If you are growing in the ground like this, we highly suggest 30-inch wide beds. There's a couple benefits to them. Number one is they're easy to step or reach across. 4x8 raised beds can be a little hard to reach all the way across. You have to go around to the other side. And another little benefit is that there's actually tools that are made specifically for 30-inch wide beds. So there's like a very nice aluminum lightweight bed rake that makes it very easy to rake out your beds, that is specifically made for a 30-inch wide bed, etc. And there's other tools as well. And then we would encourage about 12 to 18-inch aisles. We grow pretty intensively, so we do 12-inch aisles. It is a little small. It's just a foot of aisleway, so there's not much space, like if you're carrying bins to harvest or something like that, there's not much space to put it down. We kind of make do and push the plants a little bit. But if you want a little larger space, you could do 18 inches. Here is what we call our plug-and-play garden plan. And I'm going to give you a PDF that has this plan in it, and just a little more detail on each of the crops that are growing in it. And this is actually the exact plan that we used, and a couple years ago, a little while back, we grew this plan, and we kept track of how much produce we harvested off of it. We started in the spring, and we ended basically at the end of the summer. It was a challenge to keep track of everything, because we would harvest it, and then we'd weigh it, and then we'd mark it down, and But we grew over $1,000 worth of food out of this space just from the spring to summer, and then it continued on through the fall and into the winter. So it continued to produce food after that. We just didn't keep track of it anymore. This is 15 by 20 feet, which, by the way, is actually pretty small if you mark it out on the ground. It's not that big of an area. It can fit in most people's backyards. So if you want to, I'm going to give you this resource, and I have students that have gone and just used our plug-and-play garden plan. There is some benefits to how it is set up here, and we're going to talk very briefly about crop rotation. How many of you are familiar with crop rotation? Okay, yeah, so we've got a few. So the basic idea is you don't want to grow the same crop in the same spot of soil every single year, year after year after year, because different crops, and actually I think I have this in the next slide here. Why rotate your crops? Yeah, plants give and take from the soil in different ways. So some are more heavy feeders. They use up more nutrients than others. Some actually give back to the soil. Actually, all of them, by the way, give back to the soil. We'll talk about that in the next session when we talk about building healthy soil. But some are heavy feeders, light feeders. Different plants have different insect and disease issues. And some of those disease issues are actually soil-borne. So if you grow in the same space every year, it's just going to foster that same disease all the time. Whereas if you split it up and grow something else, you can actually kill the life cycle of that disease that was in the soil. And then crops can affect the next crop that is grown. And legumes actually leave nitrogen in the soil. So that's kind of a benefit. And we'll see how that plays into our little crop rotation plan here. So I'm going to give you a very simple crop rotation plan that you can use in your garden. It has 4 categories. We've named them here legumes, roots, and I've put herbs in with the roots, fruits and grains, and then leaves and flowers. And you'll notice something on the bottom here is it says families. These aren't the scientific names, but these are the families that the crop come from scientifically, okay? So legumes is your beans, green beans, peas, peanuts. Many cover crops are legumes. We don't have time to get into that. In the next group here, these are your roots and herbs, and you have your carrots, your onions, your cole or brassica family. That's your cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, etc., and your goosefoot family. In the fruits and grains, you have your nightshades. That's your tomatoes, right, and eggplant, peppers, melons and squashes, and grasses. And then in the last one, you have sunflower, brassica, and goosefoot. And the key here is you don't want to grow, it's not just growing the same crop, like cabbage over and over. You don't want to grow the same family of crop over and over. So that's why we split them up by family. And this way, you'll notice that in this one we have brassicas, and in that one we have brassicas down there. But if you follow this crop rotation plan, there's going to be a year in between where you're not growing brassicas. You see how that works? So what happens is you grow your legumes in this bed, and then the next year you're going to grow your legumes where the root crops were, and your leaves and flowers are going to come and grow where the legumes were. You see how that works? And so you just keep cycling it around. Crop rotation can actually get extremely complex, but this is a very simple one that you can kind of work out and plug into your garden. All right. So back to our little plug-and-play garden plan here. You notice that, okay, here's the leaves and flowers. That's your lettuce, cabbage, broccoli, kale, chard. And by the way, you could, if you take this plan and you use it, you could swap out and grow cauliflower instead of broccoli, right? You don't have to stick just to this, but it gives you a basic framework. Next one is your fruits and grains, so your squash, peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, potatoes, your roots, radishes, carrots, beets, onions, and then, like I said, I threw in the herbs down there, cilantro, parsley, basil, and then your legumes, your peas and green beans down at the bottom. All right. So choosing where to grow each crop in your garden. How are you going to set this up? Number one is, if you want to keep it extremely simple, you could just follow this crop rotation plan, divide your garden into 4 equal sections, and divide out your crops into those 4 types, right? and then rotate your garden plan like that. You can plan your garden crops based on the 4 kinds in the crop rotation plan that we just went over. The question is, what if they don't fit? What if you want to grow, for example, corn, and you want to grow more space of corn than fits in that one section? So this kind of takes it to the next level, and I'm going to try and keep it simple for you. But what you can do, and we'll give this as an example with the fruits and the grains, is you can take that one section of the crop rotation plan and you can split it by family. So we'll go to the next slide here, and I'll just show you real quick. Right here, let's say you're growing your tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, squash, etc., but there's no space for corn, the amount of corn you want to grow. You want to grow a larger amount of corn. Corn is a grass down here, and there's no grass growing before and there's no grass growing after. So you can actually split this section and add a 5th section in here that would just be your grasses. Does that make sense? Is everyone following how that works? And so then you would have a 5-year crop rotation plan where your fruits, your tomatoes and peppers, the next year would grow where your corn was, because you added a section here for corn, and then it would continue on like that. Does that make sense? Okay. Let me show you just something kind of fun that's kind of a benefit of this crop rotation plan, and that is, do you know what nitrogen does to plants? Anybody? Yes, okay, someone said more leaves, right? The greens, I think I heard other people saying greens. So yes, nitrogen encourages your plant to put out great big, juicy, leafy greens, okay? In fact, if you have too much nitrogen in your soil and you're trying to, let's just say you're trying to grow beets, your beets can end up with these beautiful, huge leaves and almost no beets whatsoever. Because the plant just puts all of its energy into the leaves, right? And so that's kind of a sign. If you end up in that scenario, you might say, oh, I've got too much nitrogen. And basically, you just have to grow in it until you balance it out a little bit more. A really neat thing here is that, do you all remember what legumes do? Yes, yeah, they feed the soil and they add nitrogen back into the soil, right? So what is going to grow after the legumes? Your leaves, yeah, your leaves and your flowers. And what is that nitrogen going to do? It's going to help you, it's going to encourage those plants to put out big leaves. And for a lot of these, like your lettuce and your spinach, you're not eating the fruit off of it. So it doesn't matter if they have a lot of nitrogen, because it's just going to help them grow bigger, nicer, better leafy greens for you that you're going to eat. So that's a very simple way of how crop rotation can actually benefit your garden plan. All right. So let's talk briefly about ordering your seeds. Okay. Am I supposed to stop at 10 or 10:15? 10:15? Okay, phew. That's good news. All right. So ordering your seeds. You'll want to go through your crop list and make a seed order for the varieties that you picked. And I would encourage you to do that as soon as possible. You know, that's one of the first things. It's always better to have the seeds on hand. And then order the amount of seed based on how much you want to grow. And honestly, seed is really cheap, and it's always better to have extra than to run out. So if in doubt, just order a little extra. It's really not that expensive in the long run. All right. Part 3. So we've talked about choosing what you're going to grow, right? We've talked about planning your garden visually, laying it out a garden plan. The next stage is setting up your planting calendar. When are you going to actually grow this crop, okay? So we're going to talk very briefly about what we call our perpetual harvest hack. See, gardening is full of decisions. You're constantly making decisions of what you're going to do. There's kind of, and to garden in a very simple way that's not overwhelming, it's the simple art of knowing what to do. That's like your plan that we've just been talking about. How to do it. Those are your actions that you're actually doing in the garden. and then doing it at the right time. And this third one is really critical for the garden, because every crop has its little niche of time where it grows the best. There's some that grow better in the winter, there's some that grow better in the summer, etc. And if you can set them up where, well, when you have all three of these together in one place where you can easily know what you're going to be doing, you can easily know how to do it, and you have it set up where you can easily know when to do it, this is what we call the power of our perpetual harvest hack. And we'll touch on it a little bit more here. So let's just go through those three things really quickly. What to do, this is your plan. This is the list of crops that you're going to be growing. It's basically what we just talked about with your planning your garden, right? Seeding, transplanting, cultivating, watering, trellising, etc. These are all things that you need to know, like what you're going to be doing in your garden for actually implementing your garden plan. And then there's something called succession, or I termed it leapfrog planting. And this is where you get into what we talked about with, how many of you want that experience of being able to go weekly out into your garden and harvest something fresh, something new out of your garden, right? So succession planting, or leapfrog planting, is doing just that. It is staggering your plantings of your crops so that you have a continual harvest, so that you're not just planting once and harvesting once in the year. So each time you harvest, you have another crop that's ready to plant in its place in the garden. So you keep your garden on, and it really becomes part of your lifestyle. An example is with lettuce here. Okay, so there's kind of two ways you can do this. One example with lettuce is, let's say that you just harvested a lettuce out of your garden, and what if you had a 4-week-old transplant that was ready to go right in its place, right? You're going to maximize that space in your garden because as soon as you harvest, you have a plant that's already 4 weeks old. It's got a head start, and you plant it directly in its place, and you can set up this continual harvest of lettuce in your garden, at least in the cool season. So one way of doing succession planting is planting the same crop over. Now you may be wondering, how does that fit into crop rotation, right? Basically, what we would do with this is we would keep a section that we were growing lettuce in for 1 year, and then we would move the entire rotation over. So you may have multiple plantings of lettuce in one spot for that 1 year. Another example is with peas and green beans. So your peas, the best time to grow peas, or one of the best times, is in the spring. You sow them very early, and then you harvest them, and really they basically are done harvesting pretty early in the summer. And as soon as you take them out, you could plant green beans where they were, and those green beans are going to grow, and then you're going to have a harvest of green beans later. So that's, again, a succession or a leapfrog planting. All right. But leapfrog planting can be complex, too. Number one, you've got to figure out when to plant your first crop, then how long before it will be harvested, how long of a harvest window you can expect from it, how long can you be harvesting off of that, and then when to plant the second leapfrog crop so that it's ready to go in when the first crop is harvested, plus figure out how long in the season the crop can be grown, and then repeat that for each crop because they're all different. So does that sound a little complex? Yeah, it can. And the truth is, it doesn't take that much extra work. In other words, starting seeds is pretty easy, right? You make some. I don't know if any of you are going to be in our soil blocking class later, but you just make some little soil blocks. You seed the seeds. Transplanting them into the garden doesn't take that much work, but planning it all out can be complicated. It can be very complicated. Unless you use what we call our perpetual harvest hack that simplifies that whole process, and we'll show you that in just a second. So the second little thing here is, that's talking about what to do. Then you have how to do it, and this is how to seed your starts, how to transplant, how to cultivate, how to build healthy soil, how to trellis your plants, how to extend your season into the winter without breaking your pocketbook. If you can have this knowledge right there with you, it's going to make it a lot easier as well. And then the third section here is when to do it, and this is the timing, and this is what we're going to end on. The timing of when to seed. When to seed succession plantings, like we just talked about. When to transplant into your garden. When you can be expecting to harvest from the crop, and putting it all into a calendar. And if you can put it all into a calendar, you can create a weekly checklist that will give you extreme clarity throughout your season, where every week you can just go to your little checklist, you know exactly what to do, you mark it off, and you get it done. Does that make sense? So, how many of you would like to see a way that you could create your own planting schedule in just minutes? So, I'll tell you the old way. This is because when I started farming with Bountiful Blessings Farm, my cousins and I did a little market garden ourselves, and this is how we would do this. We would go and let's go to the next slide here. Yeah, go ahead. Different seed catalogs have like spring and fall planting calculators, and you go in, you put in your frost dates, and then you've got to go, and they say, plant it 6 weeks before your average last frost, and then you've got to go to the calendar and mark it back 6 weeks, or some of them spit out a date, but then you manually put it into your calendar, et cetera, et cetera. There is an app out there called Grow Veg Garden Planning app. Some of you may be familiar with it. What ended up happening is as we began teaching people, one of our goals is to make gardening as simple and easy as possible for people. We all live extremely busy lives, right? And it can be overwhelming to figure out what to do, when to do it, how to do it all at the same time. And the truth is, as we looked at all the tools out there, we realized there wasn't a lot out there that made it extremely simple. It still took quite a bit of work, and there was a decent amount of complexity to it. So what we ended up doing is we decided to create our own gardening calendars, and we're pretty excited about this. We have called it seed time. The verse in the Bible where God promises that as long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest is going to remain. So we call it seed time, and basically you get a calendar and you can set it up based on your location, and then you can add a crop in, and it will automatically drop it in at the time based on your location and your frost dates to do it for you. What I'm super excited about is that we have opened up a free level of seed time, okay? So, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and pass out. Seed time is currently, you just grab one and pass them down. Seed time is currently closed to the public. We're in our beta stage. We're just building it right now, developing it, and so we're looking for feedback from our users, etc. But it's open by invitation only. So I'm passing around a little cards, and this is your personal invite from me to go get a Seed Time account. You can sign up with a free Seed Time account, and inside you get access to your own calendar. And if you guys want, I'll give you a little demonstration with it if you guys want to see it. Okay. So you get access to your own calendar. Once you drop in your crops, it automatically compiles a checklist for you every week, so you can just go check off the things to do. We have an integrated journal that works with it. I'll show you in a second here. And you can just, you can just leave it on the... These are just, when we first launched this, the gardeners that we were sharing, this was actually like a prototype of Seed Time. The chat just went crazy. They were so excited about being able to put their garden together like this. So go one more, and class handouts. Yeah, hit it one more time. Everyone, if you're interested, go ahead and take a picture of this right here, because this is where you're going to download the handouts, borntogrow.net/adagra. This has the slides that we just covered, as well as that garden planning worksheet and the plug-and-play garden plan, etc. So this is where you'll want to go. And once everyone has a picture of that, then I'll give you a little demonstration of Seed Time. So what happens with Seed Time is you jump in with a free account, and we give you unlimited access for 14 days. And then you can grow, on the free plan, you can grow up to 1 calendar, which for most home gardens, that would be plenty. You can grow up to 7 crop categories and unlimited planting schedules with the default varieties and crops that we have in there. And then if you end up growing more, then there's options to upgrade. But what we want, like one of our goals was we want every single person to be able to have access to the tools to get started growing. So some people, and in fact, we were just doing polls, and like 25% of our users say that the, actually it might be a little bit less because anyways, around 20 to 25% say the free plan is all that they need because they're just growing, you know, a small garden. So it's something you can get started with, and then as you grow, you can upgrade if that fits into your garden plan. So I will. Let me just make sure that I am online. Okay. And hold on one second, because I'm going to mirror my computer here. Oh, I have the settings over here. Let's see if this works. All right. Can everyone see this? Okay, so what happens is you get a calendar, and you can enter your location. You can enter your address or your zip code. So I'll just enter a random zip code in Tennessee. When you click on it, it will drop in, and it automatically chooses what growing zone that you're in, as well as your average first and last frosts for your area. We have instituted what we call average first and last hard frosts as well, because if you're getting into winter gardening, you're going to want to know when is it a really hard frost for some crops. These are all changeable. Like if you live in a microclimate and you know it's something else, then you can go change it to something else. Then you'll come over to your garden. This is your gardening calendar. You can see in this view, you have the months on the left-hand side here and the days of the week across the top. So you'll go to add a crop, and let's just say we're going to add lettuce. So you can add lettuce. You can select. We have pre-installed quite a large database of varieties. These are varieties that are from the seed companies that we just talked to you about. So you could actually just click a variety, and it will fill in the details for that variety. For the sake of time, by the way, you can add labels to that planting if you want to. You can keep it really simple, or you can go into more depth. You can set that planting. We have automatic suggested. So if you just use what comes up automatically, that would be the suggested time to plant for your area. Or you can manually change it, like if you want to change it, or you can set a manual seeding date. And then there's different settings that you can set. Once again, all of these settings we set as an automated recommendation. So if you want to keep it simple, you can just use the defaults, and it will add that crop to your calendar. And it added it in, I need to move this to 2022 because we're in the year 2022. So you can see it adds it. I'll just open it a little bigger, with a task letting you know when to seed that crop, when to prepare the bed, just to make sure you have your garden space ready, when to transplant it. We have a few cultivation reminders, and then an expected harvest window for that crop. So then you can add multiple crops, and I'll show you like a more planned out garden. It is very flexible. Like if you want, let's just say that you didn't end up seeding it in this week. You can easily just move your seeding date over, and it will adjust the entire planting schedule for you to help keep you on track. So I'll show you very briefly. This is what it can look like if you have a little bit more of a a larger garden planned out, you have all of these little tasks that fill up your garden plan. You can easily filter by the tasks. So if you just want to get an idea of what needs to be seeded coming up, you can just look at the seeding tasks and say if you're wanting to put in your seed order or something like that. Or you could switch and just look at the harvesting tasks. In fact, you could plan your garden based on when you wanted to harvest something. Let's say you're going on vacation and you're growing tomatoes to can. You could line up that planting and I'll just switch over to a timeline view here. And let's see, do I have some tomatoes in here? I do have some tomatoes, but they must be they're in this next year. Okay, so, well, I'll just, whoops. I'll just add an indeterminate variety of tomatoes. And we'll go to the timeline. And yeah, I think that I added them in 2022. So this is my indeterminate tomatoes here. And in this case, I'm going off the fly here, so we'll see. Anyways, you can move that planting of tomatoes. Like you could seed it later if you know that, for example, in August you are going to be going on vacation. You can move it later so that the harvest ends up being in September or something like that. You have the flexibility to move those plantings around. There is a timeline view here if you want to see your planting schedules more just on a visual linear graph, and you can sort them by the seeding date. For example, you want to see what's seeded in chronological order, or you can sort them by the harvesting date as well. Another thing that you can do is you can apply a label to each one, so you can assign them to a bed. So for example, if I just want to look at only the crops that are in bed number 1 in my garden, or if I want to only look at the crops that are in bed number 2 in my garden, you can easily switch between them, which can be very helpful, for example, if you're planning those succession plantings, because then you can make sure that your harvests are lining up in a succession. Or if, let's just say that I want to move this lettuce seeding over, which it dropped down here because I have it lined up by seeding time, but I can line up the transplanting so that I'm going to transplant this lettuce when this lettuce is being harvested. You guys following how that works? So it makes it a lot easier to set up those succession plantings. In fact, with each of these crops, you can come over to your list of plantings here, and you can actually add a succession planting in, and it will drop in a planting that is 2 weeks later than the earlier one, or whatever you set the succession planting to be. So this is why we kind of call it our perpetual harvest hack, because it makes it a lot easier to visually set up all those succession plantings. But we're pretty excited because you can take it. Because we've been teaching gardening for so long, we decided, hey, why not take it to the next level where you can actually click on any task and it will give you crop recommendations and tell you exactly what to do and how to do that task. And then down at the bottom, there's masterclass video lessons where you can actually watch someone actually seeding something or how to get those done. And that all comes with the free account. So you can jump in and you can once again, we talked about our favorite varieties. We have them linked right here. So with seeding beets, Merlin's one of our favorite varieties. So you can just click on it and it will jump over to a seed company that we recommend, and you could order it right there if you wanted to. And now where did my garden plan go? All right. Is it behind here? Here we go. All right. So, and then once you have your garden planned out there, you can come over to the task list and it will give you Because a bunch of these were earlier, they're all in the overdue section, but it will show you the tasks that you should be doing this week. You can mark them off, and they'll get marked as complete and drop down into a completed section. So each week, you can just go in and mark off the tasks based on your garden plan. Plus, you'll get a journal as well, where you can go in and keep records of anything that you are doing in your garden. You can add pictures from your garden. You can tag the journal entries to the different tasks that you're doing, and you can actually even link the journal entries to specific plantings in your garden, which then later on you could come back and filter by any of your tasks, or if you want to only see journal entries related to your cabbage planting, etc. So it's a great way that you can keep notes and keep records in your garden as well. So there's, when you get access to Seedtime, you'll get access to all of those. By the way, you have unlimited access to the journal and the task list, and the classroom video lessons that you can go through. And those classroom video lessons go through our 4 stages: the ignition, grow, launch, extend. So if you're interested in winter gardening, there's video instructions in there on how to grow in the winter. Plus, we have a Facebook group that you can jump into and be part of the community as well. So this is your official invitation to come join Seedtime if you'd like to jump in with that. All right. I guess that kind of pushed it to the end of our time. Is there any quick questions before we transition? Yes?
The list where you had legumes had nitrogen.
Yes.
And then you had roots, and you had the leaves. I thought it would be like the leaves next to the legumes, which had the roots. I got confused with that.
Okay, yeah, so in the crop rotation plan, we have the legumes over here, and what happens is, I know they were lined up like this, but the leaves will, after you grow your legumes here in year 1, in year 2, your leaves, your cabbage, are gonna come over and grow where the legumes were.
Okay, so you go to the whole year.
Yes, yeah.
So you grab
Yeah,
the
so
last
it rotates.
column, replace the first.
And replace the first, and they all move down. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So my question might be a little hard to answer, but I wanted to know if someone were to just do a simple, basic plug and play garden just for one season, what would be the minimum amount of time that you would need to invest in growing?
Yeah, it is a very hard question because there's extremely a lot of different factors. Are you taking like a container garden, or like a little raised bed in the backyard, or?
Raised bed or just a regular?
Yeah, I would say you could probably do it in literally like an hour or so a week. There's going to be some times in the, like if you, for example, I mean, I would highly encourage jumping in and watching through our masterclass video lessons. You can have those for free, and they'll give you the tools to be able to be efficient in your garden. So if you know what to do and how to do it, it makes a big difference. There's going to be some times of the year where you may spend 2 or 3 hours for that week, but then there's going to be other times of the year where it's just, a half hour going out. And, well, it depends on how much you're harvesting too, because then do you count processing all of that food too as part of that time, or how much do you include as being part of that garden? Does that make sense? So. Yeah. No, you can't. Now, of course, again, if you're building your raised bed from scratch, that's going to be more time than I just mentioned. But if you have the systems in place and you already have the raised bed and everything, I think that you could do it pretty minimally. Yeah. Do we have another question?
I wanted to know about heirloom seeds. Are they basically a stronger seed, or will they provide you a stronger plant than like a GMO or another kind?
Definitely better than a GMO. The main thing that you would compare them with would be open pollinated, and to be honest, they're fairly comparable. Heirloom basically just means that it's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. I mean, it really depends on the variety. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing that it's been around that long, but certain varieties, like certain dog breeds, have more health problems than other dog breeds, right? So even if they've been around for hundreds of years. So it just basically is a time delineator. Yeah. Yes, and then we'll come to the back.
So if you do drip watering system,
Yeah.
does your seed time tell you how much water to put through?
Yeah, good question. We do not currently have that in there. We do plan to add the ability to put in custom tasks or something like watering. There's so many factors with watering that it's kind of hard to give a recommendation. I mean, if you have a controlled environment, then we could give you a recommendation like on how much, you know, if it never gets any rain, et cetera, if it's inside of a hoop house or a greenhouse. So yeah, we do have, again, in the master classes, we do have one specifically on watering that would give you tips along those lines of watering. Yes, we're gonna come here and then over to this side.
Does the seed time thing, like, does it work on a phone or do I have to open my computer?
Good question. So the task list and the journal are already mobile friendly. We're working on making the calendar mobile friendly. The truth is it's a little hard to fit that like an entire year on such a small screen. So it's a little bit easier to do your planning on a computer or a tablet. But your journal and your task list is something that you may want to actually be accessing out in the field more. So yeah, that is mobile friendly. Yes.
Is there any information on this about diseases or pest control?
We do have some masterclass video lessons on pest and disease control. Yeah.
What about extending? Like, I took the time to grow like everything and then frost.
Yeah.
So a very short season.
Yeah.
Do you have any YouTube videos or anything to help us with that? Because covering it did nothing and we lost everything.
We do, yes. So if you jump in the master classes, there we have a whole section on extending your season. Yep.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question, and then I've got to let those that need to go to another class go. Yeah.
If you want to save seeds, where do you save it? Like when you start wanting to harvest, because you don't harvest everything at one time. But where in that? Do you put the first group of tomatoes, the first peppers, or in the middle, or the end?
I would generally wait until the end. The truth is that I'm not an expert on seed saving. It's something that we want to get into. We just haven't done it much.
That's when they're the strongest to be saved.
Yeah. You know, the truth is, like I said, I'm not an expert with seed saving. So I'll be honest with you in that way. I would tend to lean towards saving the seeds either from, okay, so like for example with garlic, we always pick the largest garlic cloves. You know, that would be an example. I would save the seed from the most vigorous plant that you have. And whether that's at the beginning of the season or the end of the season, just make sure it's the most vigorous one. Those would just be a couple tips that I have, but I don't have a specific answer on if it's better at the beginning or the end. Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you everyone for being such a great class. I know that we've got to jump into the next class, so you are free to go. Yeah. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So number one, probably the quicker one. So when you're describing the genetics of the hybrid, you know, I understand all that stuff, but is there a time where the hybrid then becomes an open pollinator then?
Yes.
That's at the end of lots and lots of.
Yes, and I should have mentioned it. When you go into a seed catalog, what will often happen is it'll have the name of the variety, and then it will have what's called F1 or F2, F3. That's the generation. So F1 would be the first generation, F3 would be 3 generations in. I don't remember exactly how many generations it has to get to before it becomes an open pollinated. In that case, it would no longer have the little F delineation, but yeah.
And the second thing was I just couldn't wrap my mind around the dividing. I mean, if you wanted to like plant more corn.
Yeah.
So you would just then take that amount of corn and then you would put an extra year. But then what happens to the rest of the bed, or is the whole entire bed?
Yeah. So in that specific example, what I would do is we had 4 sections, right? So I'd add in a 5th section, but one of my 4 sections was growing, let's just keep it very simple, tomatoes and corn. But I want to grow tomatoes in that entire bed. So I would put corn in the entire next bed, which would be the 5th bed. So you'd be splitting that section that was growing tomatoes and corn. You would split the corn out into an entire new section, and you'd leave the tomatoes in that first section, and that still separates it by family, right? Does that make sense?
But then for that whole year, then we wouldn't have any of the other crop that we didn't, or we would just have an extra bed? Or
Okay, yeah, so, yeah, no problem at all. So what you would do then is basically you would have a 5-year crop rotation. So now where the corn is growing, okay, so your tomatoes are gonna then grow where the corn was growing. Your corn's gonna grow where the leaves, the cabbage was growing before, and you would just extend your rotation. So you would be rotating not every 5 years, but it would take 5 years to get around the entire rotation, again, instead of 4 years. Does that make sense? It's a little complicated. You know, don't feel bad, because crop rotation is a...
master class for that one too, or?
There is, yes. We have a master class on the crop rotation as well, yeah.
Be in this room for the next presentation.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll just stop the recording and then I'll just leave it on you, and then if